Are your hands tied now because we haven't done something, we're holding you up?
No, I guess I'd like to clarify something. At no point did I indicate or wish to present that this committee has held anything up. To my knowledge, you haven't. My understanding is that the quorum of the board is the quorum of the board currently, and the attorneys that consult to the board have instructed them that it doesn't meet a quorum. I can't weigh in on that legally.
And therefore, they cannot act because there is not a quorum. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Jeanette, still.
I do. I don't know if it's for you or Mr. Rosen, but I'm just curious why the chief executive would budget money for the State Board of Corrections if the initial intent is to dismantle the Board of Corrections. Because the intent, I mean, by not appointing individuals, the intent has been declared to do away with the Board of Corrections. Why appropriate funds in the budget if that's the intent? Why not do away with the budget?
I don't think I can speak to that. I don't know if Commissioner Rosen can or not. But
The budget document reflects the obligation, the statutory obligation as proposed, which was the continuation of the Board of Corrections. Any modifications that would take place between the time that a budget document is presented to the legislature and the legislature chooses to act, make modifications, amend, or alter, that's all part of this legislative process. But in terms of making sure that the resources are put forward, the baseline obligation is presented to both committees. This component of the budget, the Board of Corrections piece, fulfills that obligation in terms of proposing both the headcount and the resources associated with current law.
So the baseline obligation of the chief executive is not taken into consideration? So we're focusing on the baseline obligation from a budgetary standpoint, but we're not focusing on the baseline obligation of appointing members to the Board of Corrections? You don't see a direct correlation between the two?
No. I think at this point, this budget document is clearly providing the resources necessary as required in current law.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
thank you.
We'll move on to General Campbell.
Good afternoon, Senator Hamper, Representative Rotundo, members of the Joint Standing Committee on Appropriations and Financial Affairs, Senator Rosen, Representative Fowle, and members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. It's great to be back. My name is James Campbell. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Defense, Veterans, and Emergency Management. And I'm here now to provide testimony in support of the Governor's biennial budget, LR 1852, an act making unified appropriations and allocations for the expenditures of state government, general funds, and other funds, and changing certain provisions of the law necessary to the proper operations of state government for the fiscal years ending June 30th, 2016 and June 30th, 2017. I'm going to address separately the initiatives as they appear in the proposed budget bill for the different programs within the Maine Emergency Management Agency, or MEMA. I'll now discuss the Maine Emergency Management Agency Program Administration, Maine Emergency Management Agency 0214, Part A, pages A159 through A160, and Part MM, Section MM1, on page 98. The first 5 initiatives for the program deal primarily with addressing issues on growing the organization. 4 of these initiatives arose from the zero-based budget analysis conducted throughout the executive branch agencies in fiscal year 2012. As part of that analysis, MEMA found that a number of key positions were underclassified with respect to similar positions in state government and similar positions in other state emergency management agencies. This was contributing to a high rate of turnover within MEMA. Another initiative here would create a position dedicated to cybersecurity. This is on page A159, which reads, "Initiative establishes one senior planner position and provides funding for all other." This initiative would create a new position specifically focused on cybersecurity planning and mitigation, working with other state and federal partners, and providing outreach to county and municipal agencies as well as the private sector. With the rapidly emerging hazards of cyber attack and cybersecurity, the agency requires a dedicated staff person to plan and prepare for cyber events. There currently is no similar position in state government. The Maine Emergency Management Agency is the centralized organization within state government to deal with hazards, both man-made and natural. And this is absolutely a critical position for us so that we can move forward and protect our systems. The next 4 initiatives deal with the reorganizations of 6 positions and continue 1 limited period position. Before I go on to these, are there any questions on the cybersecurity initiative?
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again, General, for being here. But members of the Criminal Justice Committee weren't here last week. We talked to the Office of Information Technology. They emphasized to us what a real issue this is for them, and we're spending apparently a lot of money in that manner as well. Do you know what the level of cooperation is, or is going to be, and how our state's effort is going to be set up and coordinated with the cybersecurity?
I can address just where we are today on that. Our department has sort of taken the lead for the executive branch in this regard. I've assigned an Air Force cyber operations officer on a temporary basis to work with the Maine Emergency Management Agency and the state police in trying to develop a state cyber incident response plan. This plan right now only addresses actions that would be taken within the executive branch, because frankly at this point we don't have the authority to deal with other parts of state government. Our intent ultimately is to have a much more synchronized plan that deals across the board in state government. Right now we're focused primarily on the executive branch. For some of you who may not know this, there are 7 separate caucuses of information technology within the Maine state government. Only one of those deals with the executive branch. And so right now we're attacking this and essentially eating the elephant one bite at a time. This is an enormous issue, as you might imagine. I am not able to keep that Air Force officer in this position beyond this June. And so when that officer returns to his normal duties, if we have this position at MEMA, that person would take on that synchronizing role and trying to make sure that our policies, plans, and procedures are in place and that they're nested with all the other agencies within the executive branch.
Representative Rotundo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner. And maybe this is a question more for Commissioner Rosen, but when OIT was here for us, they're requesting like 29 positions to deal with this issue, and it just would make a lot of sense for the state to have one vision in terms of how we're going to do this and how we're going to coordinate it, because it seems like there's a lot of money involved, a lot of people and a lot of moving parts, and I would certainly hope that there will be one plan so that all of those positions and that planning can be integrated so that we're sure that we're
Yes, ma'am.
as effectively and efficiently as possible.
And that's the direction that
In
we're going.
silos.
That is the direction that we're going. This position would be that central synchronizing agent, as it were. Moving on, the next 4 initiatives deal with the reorganizations of 6 positions and continue 1 limited period position. On page A159, first initiative provides funding for an approved reorganization of 1 Planning and Research Associate 1 position to 1 Planning and Research Associate 2 position, and 2 Planning and Research Associate 2 positions to 2 Senior Planner positions. These reorganizations have been approved by the Bureau of Human Resources. On page A160, there's an initiative to reorganize 1 Planning and Research Associate 1 position to a Planning and Research Associate 2 position, and 1 Planning and Research Associate 2 position to a Senior Planner. This initiative reorganizes the positions to better reflect the actual duties and responsibilities. The Planning and Research Associate 1 position assists in the management of technological hazards program. This person coordinates and conducts workshops and training for facility owners and first responders, collects and analyzes hazardous materials data. The Planning and Research Associate 2 position that we'd like to upgrade manages the agency's technological hazards program, drafts policy and manages budgets for the State Emergency Response Commission, works with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other state and federal agencies on program implementation, provides direct support to local emergency planning committees and facility owners and managers on training, planning, and exercises. The next initiative reorganizes 1 senior contract and grant specialist position to a public service manager 1 position. This initiative reorganizes the position to better reflect the actual duties and responsibilities this individual is currently handling. The position is responsible for managing many federal grants with differing eligibility rules and documentation requirements, administering the federal disaster assistance programs, and ensuring that all grants programs are in compliance with federal audit requirements and accounting practices. The next initiative continues 1 Planning and Research Associate 1 position and related to all other costs, originally established by Financial Order 005147, and continued as a limited period position in Public Law 2011, Chapter 380, and Public Law 2013, Chapter 368. This initiative continues a limited period position with legislative headcount previously established by a financial order and continued in Public Law 2011 and Public Law 2013. This position is needed to process hazardous materials reporting fees into the State Emergency Response Commission account and plays a key role in hazardous materials planning and reporting under the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act. Before I move on, I'll pause for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General. Before we move off this section, all of these categories have other special revenue funds, and are those primarily course fees from groups who need training?
Some of that's the case. Some of them are federal grants. Each one of these positions is funded with a multitude of different methods. And I've got Mr. Dwayne Huber here from NEMA. Dwayne, I don't know if you can address some of those more specifically.
Yes, the last 2 positions are special, other special revenue, 100%. Those last 2 positions noted for hazardous materials in there. Those special revenues are generated by fees from organizations who are required to report the hazardous materials on hand or the extreme hazardous substances that they have on hand. Those are 100%. Actually, the last 3 positions noted are 100% funded through this dedicated revenue. The positions prior to that are a mix of federal and general fund revenues.
So, separate from the federal expenditures, which is our match money, then there are federal grants, specific federal grants within that other special revenue account as well?
Yes, within the special revenue account, the only special revenue that we receive is from fees from organizations that have hazardous materials.
Oh, okay.
The other federal grants are not special revenue funds.
And you're not getting any fees for the trainings that you provide to municipalities on disaster planning or any of that kind of stuff?
Typically not.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, a number of these classifications obviously will involve more compensation. Are these prospective only, or are we going to, what do you think, looking back for?
No, this would be all new, I think. Dwayne, isn't that correct?
Yes, because of the upgrades that have all been management driven, they will all incur back pay for those positions that are being upgraded. None of them are individually initiated.
Where would that extra money show up in the budget?
Through cost savings of personnel that we haven't had on hand over the last few months, and it's all very doable within the existing budget, and it's already been calculated out to be able to cover those back pay fees.
Thank you.
Representative Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General. Question about the limited period position. Do you anticipate that to be going forward after the biennium? Is there a reason why you aren't proposing to make that a permanent position? looks like it had been established earlier.
It's because Dan's telling me that this position can't be permanent because of the way that it's funded. It has to be limited period. Thank you. And just to clarify on a lot of these, again, we started off by saying that we've gone through a lot of these upgrades because we're not paying these folks competitive salaries, and as a consequence of that, we get people in, we get them trained, they start to gain some experience, and they immediately leave. And that causes us an enormous amount of tension and stress within the organization because we're never fully manned. We don't always have the right people at the right time because it's almost a revolving door situation. So by getting these upgrades through, it'll create a lot more stability and longevity in our programs and systems that I think are of great benefit to the state. I'm now going to discuss the request for a working capital advance for MEMA as contained in Part NN. Section MM-1 on page 98 of the budget documents. A working capital advance to the Department of Defense, Veterans, and Emergency Management. The State Controller is authorized to advance up to $350,000 from the General Fund unappropriated surplus to the Administration Maine Emergency Management Agency program within the Federal Expenditures Fund during fiscal year 2015 to 2016 to be used to provide cash necessary to meet current expenditures of the program until federal funds become available in the same fiscal year. The State Controller shall report to the Joint Standing Committee on Appropriations and Financial Affairs within 30 days of making any working capital advance for this purpose. Funds advanced from the General Fund to the Administration Maine Emergency Management Agency program must be returned to the General Fund unappropriated surplus not later than December 31st, 2015. This language authorizes a loan to the Maine Emergency Management Agency in the event that the delay in the passage of the Department of Homeland Security budget. As some of you know, we had to do this last year because the federal government delayed in passing funding for Department of Homeland Security. They did it again this year. They've passed a budget, but we haven't received any of the grant money yet. Last year, the legislature graciously allowed us to get this advance loan, and it was repaid almost within, I think it was within 30 to 60 days after the advance. We anticipate that we may have to do this again this fiscal year. If we don't get this advance for bridge funding, we would have to shut down the Maine Emergency Management Agency because of so much of what they do is funded by these federal grants from DHS. In addition to that, we would not be providing the grant funds that are pass-through grants that go to law enforcement agencies around the state and so on. Again, we did this last year. It didn't cause any problems. And I would apologize on behalf of the federal government, but that's not really my place. Now that the Department of Homeland Security's budget has passed, we're assured of adequate federal funding, but we're not sure when it's going to become available to the state. And so by getting this bridge loan, we just sort of we protect ourselves, but again, the loan will be repaid promptly as soon as we get that federal funding. Any questions on that? Thank you. I'll move on. The next program within MEMA is on page A168, the Stream Gauging Cooperative Program. This initiative provides funding for critical flood warning systems and increased monitoring capacity for both floods and drought. This initiative provides funding for increases in costs brought about by changes to the United States Geological Survey formula for the Cooperative Stream Gauge Program. Recent changes in the USGS national and regional budget policies have raised the cost of stream gauging and changed the rate at which state dollars are matched. Over the last 2 years, MEMA has been forced to reallocate federal funds intended to support local programs in order to fill this gap. The increase sought in this initiative should close the funding shortfall and ensure that no gauges are lost. The gauges supported by this cooperative program are some of the most critical for flood forecasting. For those of you who are not familiar, we maintain a pretty significant network of stream gauges across the state. Again, there's a funding formula that's joint federal and state. And without those stream gauges, we effectively cannot adequately or accurately predict floods for the state. And it's absolutely critical, particularly this time of year, that we have an operating stream gauge program. These funds support not only gauge operation, but also research, data analysis, and real-time availability of data to the public. A small percentage of the funds also support groundwater monitoring. It should be noted that prior to this increase, the local office of the USGS had held costs steady for their partners for over 10 years, and it's only been in the last 2 years that they've begun to reduce the amount of federal funding and increase the requirement on the state. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'll answer any further questions that you may have.
Your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General. I'd like to go back to A158, and it's in reference to the initiative to establish a communications director from the public service manager to position.
That's for the overall department?
Yep.
Okay.
I was just sort of curious, what does the person now do communications? Obviously, you have somebody that handles media relations and public relations.
When I was in front of the committees this morning, we talked about this. The Department of Defense Veterans Emergency Management is I think, and again, you might be able to correct me, but I think it's the only department in the state government that does not have a communications director. What we have is a federal Army public affairs officer who helps us out, but I'm essentially violating the terms of his federal employment by making him do state work. In addition to that, at MEMA, Ms. Lynette Miller for some time has handled this outreach piece, but that's not her assigned position. And when we have an emergency, again, it's sort of catch as catch can. And the department as a unified whole has no one person to do all of this, which creates issues for us across the board, from outreach to veterans to communication with the public during military deployments, to communication with the public during state emergencies. And again, we've seen this as a major need for some time now, and that's why we're seeking funding with the governor's support to establish this position.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. I'm just sort of curious, you mentioned state emergencies. So what is the current process for state emergencies? Because my understanding when we visited MEMA was that there was a system in place for having communications with the public, having communications with the media. I'm not really seeing the need for this additional person. So
The system is ad hoc. This, if you want to call it a system, again, there's a person who, as an additional duty beyond the other things that she does at MEMA, has been tasked to sort of manage this for the Maine Emergency Management Agency. But that doesn't include communications through other aspects of the department. So this position is for the department. So it's for everything that we do, for all the elements of the department, which are disparate and pretty wide-ranging. But again, we feel that so much of what we do requires effective communication with the public, that to have a series of ad hoc, constantly changing arrangements with untrained people who have other duties as assigned makes us less than effective, and given the current climate and the need to effectively communicate, not just through the media, but through a variety of media, having one person who is a centralized belly button, so to speak, for the department makes enormous sense, and I think helps us serve the state better. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, General. For two communities along the Kennebec River, I'm particularly interested in the stream gauging program. So this initiative that you have is additional funds, that state funds only. There are no federal funds
That's correct.
reflected here, in order to meet the increased costs that the federal government imposed, but did not increase their match, increase their
Well, the
federal
federal
funds.
government didn't impose those. What the federal government said was, we are not going to give you as much money as we used to give you to support this program. So if you want to continue to have this number of stream gauges, the state has to kick in more money in order to do that.
Okay, so it wasn't actually increased costs to do the program, but increased
It's
costs because of federal.
Increased cost to the state
To the
because of the
state.
different matching criteria that
Okay,
we use.
thank you.
Seeing no others, thank you.
Thank you.
As we move into the public comment portion, I want to remind everybody that the microphone light is on. You're on not only broadcast within building, but over the internet. And if you're handing in a pretty testimony over to the clerks, they'll distribute, it should be 40 copies for everyone to have a piece of. And as you've already noticed, we move in and out. That's normal thing for us. There's requirements in other parts of the building. What else do we see? Chair's an error. I missed a couple of presenters tonight. Fire Protection Commission. Yes, no? Nobody.
Mr. Chair, I think I moved the
You're doing that today, okay? Representative LaJoy now putting on his fire protection hat, turning on a microphone.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just like when I was in the fire service, when there's an emergency, there's nobody around, you jump in and try to take care of the situation. Senator Hamper, Representative Rotundo, Senator Rosen, and Representative Fowle, and distinguished members of both committees. My name is Michael Gurley. I represent District 58, which is part of Lewiston. I am also a member of the Fire Protection Service Commission, and this is my 7th year on the committee, so I've been on for a while. I've taken many positions. I felt it was important to be in front of you this morning, or this afternoon, excuse me, to present the proposed budget. I may not be able, or I will not be able to answer a lot of your questions specifically. However, I'm sure that I can bring that message to our current chair, Chief Guimont, South Portland, for you. In front of you, you will find that the usual allocation for 2013 and 14, as well as 14 and 15, was $495. Actually, we had asked for $500, anyways, it's $495. You'll also find that moving forward for 2015-16 and 16-17, we are asking for an increase of $2,000. And basically, that $2,000 would cover expenses incurred above and beyond what we've been expending so far. And some of that is the expense to have clerical help when we have our meeting, which is part-time, but that pays for that portion. I should at this time try to give you what we have here on the proposal that says what the budget purchases. It says the commission is charged with monitoring and evaluating the state's fire protection services on a continuing basis and to provide recommendations through the assurance of annual report and the executive branch, to the executive branch and the legislature regarding necessary changes in the system. So basically what we do is we monitor the emergency system process throughout the state. And we have approximately 16 individuals on the committee from all walks of professionalism, if you will. We have a professional fire chief, volunteer fire chief, volunteer professional firefighters. We have 2 senators, 3 representatives. We also have individuals from the Bureau of Labor Standards, Fire Marshal's Office, Maine Fire Training Institute, as well as the EMS program, Emergency Services, So you see, we have a great variety of individuals to monitor the emergency services throughout the state. What we also do is we'll monitor the legislation that may come in, other than through our committee, and to see if it warrants us speaking on that behalf, or if it can be combined with other bills, if you will, of the same nature. So this is where I'm at right now, and if you would like to request any information, I will bring that message to them. And the next time we meet here and or upstairs, I'll make sure that that information is available.
Questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this forward. So you mentioned that part of this increase in the budget is for adding clerical help. There's 16 individuals on the commission. Has there ever did they ever need help before? Like, has this been historical that we need to add clerical help and one of the 16 members couldn't step up and be secretary?
We always have had clerical help from the very beginning to take care of note-taking and the roster, as well as monthly scheduled meetings and the agendas. So we've always had clerical help. The thing that comes into this is the extra expense, I would say, on stamps, literature, and stuff of that nature. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Greg, would you mind if I brought corrections officers up first? Okay, thank you. So you've got about an hour, right? We're going to be running a three-minute clock. We'll try to keep you as close to the 3 minutes as possible. We're going to start off with Harry Beal, then Will Towers, Rosemary Burns, Kevin Claxton, and Pete. I'm not sure of your last name. Yes.
And we're glad the public is here today to talk with us. And I just want you to know we're moving the schedule around to accommodate the public, because we know that many of you have driven a long way, a long back home, and we don't want to keep you here into the evening. So.
I'd like to thank both committees for having us. My name is Harry Beal Jr. I've lived in Washington County for the last 57 years. It's one of the most economically depressed areas of our state. I started working for the state of Maine in 1985, when, as luck would have it, I was chosen as one of the first 8 corrections officers to be hired at the Down East Correctional Facility. The main reason I took the job was to have a future for my young family, health insurance for my girls, my wife, and myself, the promise of a retirement if I made this my career. This has been a stressful job. I've worked through state shutdowns, worked for the promise that someday we would be paid. I was lucky when the state froze the step increases for our workers, as I was already at my top step. But with each freeze and no increases in wages, I went further behind. Started a small business to help make ends meet, and then I did what too many other corrections officers do. I went through a divorce. But through it all, I stayed the course, continued to work for the state of Maine. Each contract negotiation, we heard the same thing. The state has no money. And after the contracts are signed, and the state always found money it somehow didn't know it had. Usually it was hidden and then found in the folds of one agency or another. We've had the manpower on the front line working the units cut to the point of no return. And then, instead of appreciating the fact that a number of our workers were willing to give up their free time to make sure we had adequate staffing at these 24/7 facilities by working overtime, we just collapsed posts. Working in some cases with as little as 3 officers and 1 sergeant over Christmas, with 145 prisoners in 3 separate domes while still having visits. Where was our emergency backup? Our zero overtime policy, which looks good on paper, does not staff our units. Overtime is 1.5 times pay to work beyond your regular work week, and it's a reasonable alternative compared to a new hire with a benefit package. But instead of thanking our officers for their dedication and sacrifice, the complaints about overtime keep coming in. This lack of manpower just increases the stress in an already extremely stressful job. We need more officers. In order to attract these new officers and then keep these officers that we've invested so much time and training dollars in, we need better wages and safe working conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Towers?
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Will Towers. I've been an employee of the Department of Corrections for 29 years. And I am also the president of Local 2968, AFSCME, which are these members back behind me here in the green shirts. And I'd just like to let you all know that we're here on our own time. Either had to take a vacation day or you're on your day off, time off, whatever it may be. We heard the department here earlier talking about recruitment and retention. We recognize there is an issue with that. We have a solution for that. It would be, we currently have, most of the COs are at pay grade 16 in our contract book. We have 8 steps in there. What we would do is you eliminate the first 3 steps, slide the rest of the steps down, create 3 new steps on the upper end of that. So it would create about $2.25 an hour more for the starting people. So you could actually recruit people to come in, which was brought up earlier, that we only pay just a little, about $1 more than Walmart, which is unthinkable for the stuff that we have to put up with. The people down at the prison and at the correctional center and the other facilities. I mean, you go from one extreme, you have to run in and cut somebody down that's decided to hang themselves. You could go and have to respond to someone getting stabbed 82 times, somebody getting beat over the head with a guitar. It's just unthinkable that you have to start someone down there for that type of pay, you know, for $15.